art students. This week we are going to learn about the elements of art and principles of design. This is one of the most important lessons that you will ever get in art class, and if you go on to take more art classes, this knowledge will be necessary. So make sure that you are really paying attention and taking good notes today. We will actually use this information to help us design our portfolio covers. So if you have not gotten a piece of poster board, for those of you who are at home, make sure that you have a piece of poster board for this week. All right, so we're going to review what we've already learned. We're going to open the discussion. We're going to take notes first on the elements of art. Then we'll take a break. Then we'll take notes on the principles of design. And then you will have a test where you actually have to draw the different elements and principles. So while I'm showing you the examples, pay attention to those examples because that will give you ideas for when you have to draw your own pieces. All right, so the first thing I want to do is review what we've talked about and do a 3, 2, 1 bridge. So I want you to write 3 words that describe art. Then I want you to write 2 questions about art. And then I want you to come up with a metaphor for art. So that would be something like art is color, and then you would have to explain the connection. So a metaphor is when you relate two different things together and then you have some kind of symbolic connection. Then on Schoology, your discussion is, I used to think blank about art, but now I think blank. So go ahead and pause the video here and write those things down in your sketchbook, and then go to Schoology and use that sentence stem to write your discussion point. I used to think blank about art, but now I think blank. All right, so welcome back, and we're going to review a couple things. So does art matter? Why do we take art in school? We do that to be well-rounded, educated, and informed, and to have good taste. And this does matter in life. You have to make lots of design choices, and you have to use problem solving and creativity in your daily life. Is there such a thing as bad art? And what does good art look like? And what does bad art look like? So my personal opinion is absolutely there is bad art. If it does not have any of the qualities of art, it is bad. Good art is based on opinion, and bad art is based on opinion. So good art could be something like a painting or a portrait of someone, but it could also be something like a room that you walk into in an art gallery and there are lights everywhere. So there's a huge range of what good art can look like. But there's also bad art. So just art that is poorly done, it took no skill and it has no meaning. That would be an example of bad art. Does art have to be beautiful? No. First of all, beauty is subjective. So what I think is beautiful, someone else could think is ugly, and vice versa. If it has a message or if it took skill to create, it is also art, but it doesn't have to be beautiful. A lot of good art is about ugly things or sad things or provocative things, and it might be ugly to look at, but it also took skill and has a message. So good art can be ugly. What makes someone an artist? Anyone who creates art and identifies himself as an artist is an artist. A professional artist is different. So a professional artist should treat making art like a job and sell or show their work. So if you do not sell or show your work to anyone, you could be an artist, but you are not a professional artist. So in class, a lot of times when I say artist, I am using that as shorthand for professional artist. I do believe there is a difference between the two. What is the point of art? The point of art is to express and communicate ideas, and the ideas can be anything from something very simple like color or line to something very complex like world peace. All right, so let's get into my definition of what is art. And I believe that art should be labor intensive visual communication intended for an audience. So let's break down what that means. It should take some work, labor intensive. It should be visual, so you should be able to see it. And then it should have communication, so it should be trying to communicate with people in some way or another, and it's intended for an audience, so it means you want people to look at it. So if you're drawing or doodling in a private diary and you won't let anyone see it, that is not art. That is more like art therapy. So for it to be actual art, it needs to be intended for an audience. The other four things that I talk about when I talk about what is art is the four qualities of art. So art needs to have at least one of these things to be considered art, but it does not have to have all of these things in the same piece to be considered art. It could have more than one of these things in the same piece though. So the qualities are beauty, skill, meaning or a provocative message, and expression. So art should be either beautiful or skillful or meaningful slash provocative. Those can be slightly different, but put them in the same category. Or expressive. Now, something could be beautiful and expressive in the same piece, and that is perfectly okay. But if something is none of those, then I would put it in the bad art category. All right, so for our opener, I want you to think about if you know anything about the elements of art and principles of design. If you do, I want you to pause the video and write down what you already know about the elements of art and principles of design. If you've taken a different high school art class, you might already know what they are, or you might remember a few of them. If not, don't worry, I'm about to go into it. Welcome back. So we're going to talk about the elements of art and principles of design. And I am going to start in this video with talking about the elements of art. Then in my next video, I will talk about the principles of design. They both work together to create good art. All right, so let's talk about the word element. An element is a basic part of something in its simplest form. There are 7 elements in art. They are line, shape, form, texture, value, color, and space. They are the basic elements that we find in all artwork. So what I want you to do is get that notes handout that you downloaded or that I gave to you, and then I want you to write in this space. So there are boxes for each one of the elements of art. So when we get to that element of art, I want you to write the definition in that box, and feel free to pause the video as many times as you need to get all the notes down. All right, so right under where it says elements of art, I want you to write building blocks. So that's going to be kind of like your reminder for what the elements are. So that way you can keep straight the difference between the elements of art and the principles of design. So think of the elements of art as building blocks, or the materials that you need, or the ingredients that you need to make art. The first one is line. And line is a mark with length and direction. It is a continuous mark made on a surface by a moving point. And you just have to write that first definition. Now let's look at these two pieces of art and how they both demonstrate line. So the piece on the left is a photograph, but the tree trunks and branches make lines. The piece on the right is a bridge, and it has people on the bridge, but the main focus is that bridge and the shadows that it's casting, and it has strong lines all over it. Also, if I look at the painting, it makes my eyes look back in space, because I imagine a line at the top of the bridge and a line at the bottom part where the wall of the bridge meets the concrete. So that is also use of line. It's imaginary line. This is another piece that is more abstract, but it is outlined and it has lines separating the background. So that is another example of using line in art. So if the line is still visible in the finished piece, then you are using the element of line. The next element of art is color. So there are a few things that I want you to remember about color, even though color is huge. We could learn about that all year and still not know everything about color. Today, I want you to write down the word hue, intensity, and value. The word hue means color. So a lot of times when we say the word color, we actually mean the word hue. And hues are the colors that we can create digging natural elements out of the ground, and they are the basis for the color wheel. Intensity is how bright or dull a color is. Value is how light or dark a color is. So intensity is the brightness or the dullness, which is different from the value, which is the lightness or the darkness. So you can still have a very intense light color. Think about like a pastel neon kind of color. And the primary colors are, hopefully you already know this, but just to review, red, yellow, and blue, and they are mixed to create all the other colors. The next element of art is value. Value is the lightness or darkness of a color. So notice that I had you write down value in the box under color, but you also have value as its own separate element of art. So you can have values in black and white. So that picture on the right is a pencil drawing, and the artist used a range of values from dark black in the tree trunks all the way to the white of the leaves that are floating on top of the water. And that value creates depth for us in the drawing. The painting on the right by Picasso is an example of using color, but also using value. So this painting is blue. The dark values are actually navy, and then you have a range of values all the way to the white hair that is actually a very pale blue color. So you can use value in black and white, and you can also use value in color. So if the work is a lot about darks and lights or shadows and light, that is going to be an artwork that uses value. The next element of art is shape. So for shape, this one is a little bit different than the other ones because you have to have another element of art to be able to have shape. A shape is an enclosed area defined and determined by other art elements. It is also two-dimensional. So write down that definition and also write down 2D, which is short for two-dimensional. And let's look at this painting as a good example of what I'm talking about. So for the different shapes, and there are some geometric shapes, I see some circles, I see some kind of like rough looking squares and triangles, but then I also see some shapes that don't have a name, and we call those organic shapes. Then I also see a star and a moon. So all those shapes are defined by either color, which is another art element, so it's defined by another art element, or line. So the ones that are outlined, those are defined by line, which is another art element. If I draw a line and I go, let's pretend like this is my pen right here, and I start right here close to my eye, and then I go all the way around, and then I stop right here. Even though it's really close to a circle, it is not a circle until I enclose it or connect that line. So if it's not a connected line, it is a line, but as soon as I connect it, it becomes a shape. So hopefully that makes sense without me actually drawing it for you. But just keep in mind that shapes have to be defined and determined by a different art element. It could be texture, it could be value, but you have to use something else to define it. Another thing about shape is that it's two-dimensional or flat. So this artist is using shape to make things look three-dimensional, but it is still two-dimensional and flat. But it also gets a little bit into our next art element, which is form. And form can be used in two different ways. So underneath form, write the definition 3D object. So for something to have form, it needs to be a 3D object, or it needs to be two-dimensional artwork, 2D art, that looks 3D. So on the left, that is actually a sculpture where the artist has made a three-dimensional object. It is non-objective, so it doesn't look like anything that you would see in real life, but if you look at it long enough, maybe you can see a little bit of a human figure kind of emerging from the form. So that is a three-dimensional object. I could actually visit that in the art gallery and walk all the way around it. The example on the right is a painting that looks three-dimensional. So this artist used different values of paint to create the illusion of form. So even though that is a flat painting, if I touch it, there's nothing three-dimensional there. It looks very three-dimensional. It looks like this man is actually coming forward in space and that he's real. So that is another example of form in art. Another thing that you need to remember is that shapes are flat or two-dimensional and forms are three-dimensional. So for example, a triangle is a two-dimensional shape, but a pyramid is a three-dimensional form, or a cone is a three-dimensional form. So both of those would be considered form in art, and then the flat things would be considered shape. The next element of art is space. So there are two major concepts that I need you to understand here. We define space as the distance or area between, around, above, below, or within things. So all the prepositions. Then the two major things you need to understand here is in any kind of painting you're going to, or photograph, or any kind of two-dimensional art, you're going to want to have a foreground, middle ground, and background. So you've probably heard the word background already. If I look at this painting on the left, in the background I have the blue sky and the clouds, and the background starts all the way down at the horizon and goes all the way up to the top of the picture plane. Then we have the foreground, and you may or may not have heard that term before. So the foreground is the front of the picture, and usually that's going to be at the bottom of your image. So the green grass that we have in the front, and especially the little pops of orange that are flowers, that is your foreground. If I want to have a person look like he is very close to the viewer, I want to put them in the foreground and probably only show them from the waist up. Then you have the middle ground. So in this landscape, I have the yellow kind of like grain or whatever that is in the middle. And then I have those trees that look like they're a little bit closer because the branches and colors are a little bit more defined. So those are my middle ground. Now the trees that are like more hazy and they look smaller and shorter, those are actually in the background. And that creates depth and makes it look like it is a realistic image, even though it's a painting and it is a little bit abstracted. Then on the right, this image shows you the other concept that I need you to understand in art. So in art, we talk about positive space and negative space. So the positive space is whatever the object or subject is taking up, that space that it's taking up. And then the negative space is going to be the empty areas around that object. And in art, the negative space is actually just as important as the positive space. So our natural inclination a lot of times is to ignore the negative space, but in art, it actually is very important to pay equal attention to both. The next element of art is texture. And so for texture, it is kind of self-explanatory, but the texture is the surface quality or feel of an object. So that is your definition. Write that down. And then examples would be the smoothness, roughness, softness, etc. The other thing I want you to write down are the terms actual and implied. So art can have two different types of texture. Art can have actual texture, or the way it's actually going to feel when I touch it, or it can have implied texture, the way it looks like it feels. So on this slide right here, we have several examples of actual textures. So if I were to print out this slide right here and hang it up on the wall, and I were to touch the printout, it does not have any texture. It would be implied texture. But those actual objects have texture. So if I touch a wrinkled sheet of paper or a corrugated piece of cardboard or fabric or snakeskin or the bark of a tree, those are all going to have actual textures that I can feel. And then if you are going to touch a painting is going to have an actual texture of the paint on the canvas. But then at the same time, if that painting is of something else like skin, it's implied texture of skin. So that is the difference between actual and implied texture. This picture right here is an example of implied texture. So this artist used a lot of different lines to imply the texture here. So it looks like there's texture, there's visual texture, but if I were to touch this piece of art, there would not be like a bunch of bumps or anything like that. It's implied texture. All right, we're going to stop here for this video, but be sure to check back in with me for the other video on the principles of design.